On that day, there were two parades. From the eastern side, there was a parade, and from the western side, there was a parade into Jerusalem. And according to scholars like Dominique Grisson and Marcus Borg, the two parades couldn't have been more unlike. Because from the western side, Pilate came back from his summer cottage for the festivals in Jerusalem. The Roman law determined that the governor of Idumea, and that is Jerusalem and Samaria, that governor must be seated in the city, otherwise the festivals of the Passover cannot take place, because it must take place under the eye of the Roman, and especially the governor who rules that area. So he entered the city from the western side with pomp and fare, soldiers marching in front of him with their weapons, and him himself on a chariot drawn by a horse. Indeed, a powerful picture if you look at that. And the message was quite clear that Pilate brought with him. We will not tolerate any upheaval during this festival's season. We will be the powerful ones, and he showed it through this entrance of him into the city of Jerusalem. Many powerful armies use a big affair like an entrance into a city to show their power and to show their dominance in the area. I can recall a couple of years ago, 20 or 25 years ago, that pastors in the south of the United States during this Palm Sunday worship service would say that the pomp and fare of the USA and Allied armies entering the city of Baghdad was very much like the entrance of Jesus into the city of Jerusalem. And they preached that as these armies of the USA and their allies brought peace and freedom from weapons of mass destruction and all other fearful things they named, that was the way Jesus would have brought freedom into the city of Jerusalem. Now, history taught us that all of that was just a lot of nonsense. What those armies brought to the city of Baghdad and Iraq was war, violence, killing. Nothing of peace and nothing of liberation. Then on the eastern side, from the Mount of Olives, he entered, Jesus, on the back of a colt or the foal of a donkey. And by doing that, there was also a crowd welcoming him with a lot of palm and myrtle leaves swaying in the air and songs being sung like we sang this morning, Hosanna. The song Hosanna came from the Psalms, and it was used during that time of the Passover to sing these psalms, Psalm 113 to Psalm 118, called the Hallel, and that was the custom of the Jewish people to refrain these psalms over and over and over as they went up to the temple, and then during the Passover received the forgiveness of God through the sacrificial animals. And when they go out again, they would sing and rephrase these psalms. And therefore, it's not strange that during that time, they used Psalm 118 again to sing about the coming of the King. Hosanna. Hosanna, if you literally translate it, means save us. Now, this is what they expected. It wasn't probably as big as a crowd as the one on the western side of the city welcoming Pilate back as the governor of the city, but it was a crowd coming together to welcome Jesus. But they expected the king, the anointed one, because they longed as Jewish people for freedom, and they expected him to be the King of David coming into Jerusalem city to bring about a revolt and then free them from the oppression of the Roman Empire. That's why the Romans made such a big affair of this, telling them through their entry into the city, don't even think about it. We will crush any revolt. The soldiers are ready. The governor of the city is here. Don't even think about it. Yet on the eastern side, they did sing these freedom songs from Psalm 118. And then Jesus enters in such a way that the book of Zechariah, chapter 9, verse 9, came true. Rejoice, O greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout, daughter of Jerusalem. See, your king comes to you, righteous and having salvation, gentle and riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. If we read about these two different entries into the city of Jerusalem, we have to remember the way Jesus entered said something in a specific way. He himself said that everything that he taught within parables. And outside of parables, he said he didn't teach anything. So an entry in a city like this, a public entry, should also have been within the teachings of Jesus, of course. And therefore, this entry into the city, we have to look at it from the point of view that it is a parable. Jesus says something with this, and then it becomes really interesting. He knows his Jewish audience. He knew that they were people expecting the anointed one, the one actually being on the horse, the one who would spread out weapons and say, our time is here, let's stand up against these oppressors. He knew that. And therefore he sent his disciples out to fetch a donkey, a colt, a young donkey. And he climbed on the back of that colt and he went into Jerusalem. By doing that, he actually say on the one side, I do accept your hosannas as being a king, but in a different way than what you expect me to be a king. And that's very important to see in the events on Palm Sunday. A king could enter a city in two ways. On the one side, they can do it by showing their power and their might, like Pilate did it, the governor of that area. He came in and there was no question about it. He wanted to demonstrate his power. He's in control. He's the guy. The same king can enter in a very subdued manner on the back of a donkey. That was something that they did in the Middle East during those years. And by doing that, that king will demonstrate he comes in peace. It's not wartime. He comes in peace. He loves his people that he governs, and therefore he enters the city in a peaceful manner. So on the one side, the parable says to us that Jesus did come in peace, and on the other side, this parable from Jesus said he kind of accepted that they see him as some kind of king, which would have been a critique towards the Roman emperor and the Roman governor, and also towards the Jewish elite. Because he said to them, yes, I hear what you're saying, the anointed, the King David that you actually wanted to enter the city, but I am actually a king of peace and a king of love. So these crowds gathered and they cheered him and they waved their palm leaves and they put their clothes on the road so that they could go over it, and then they left him. In the afternoon, Jesus and his disciples gathered quietly in the city of Jerusalem on their own. And there they were. No festivities, no people knocking on the door and saying, we want to meet our king. Nobody singing hosannas through the windows and say, our king has arrived. Nothing. Silence. Jesus and his disciples in peace, in some place, somewhere in the city. And that demonstrates to us that the vast majority of the people welcoming Jesus in Jerusalem had no clue who this person was. Some of them probably expected Elijah, the forerunner of the Messiah. Some of them expected, as we know, David, the king that brought the Israeli empire to its highest level of governance. And yet here he came in peace and quiet, and the crowd should have been either disappointed or confused, and they just broke up and they went to their houses and sipped their coffee and had a chat with their friends. Nothing more. And when we realize what has happened that day in Jerusalem, 2 different parades, 2 different kinds of governors or kings, 2 totally different messages, then we start to understand who Jesus really was and what was the spirit of these parables that he taught his people. He came with a message that said, if you are confronted with hatred, answer with love. Therefore, he would say something like, walk the extra mile. Why not? Do it in love. If you are confronted, his message was, with violence, answer with peace. He is the one, although the Old Testament says an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, he's the one that came and said, no, turn the other cheek. He's the one that said, forgiveness is 70 times 7 times. He's the one that said, you cannot answer hatred with hatred. You cannot answer violence with violence. It doesn't work. And that's what we have learned throughout history. Churches will celebrate war. They will celebrate victories over other people. Like these Jewish people celebrated one of the Maccabean people that came back, and he came into 100 years before Jesus. He came into the city on the same kind of manner Jesus did it. He came on horseback into the city, and he just overthrown the Syrians to the north and captured the city of Acre, and the whole city is in uproaring, singing hosannas, Psalm 118, welcoming him into the city. And that's what they wanted. They did not want this guy on a donkey that came in and tell them, you have to answer hatred with love and you have to answer violence with peace. If they did, the history would look quite different from the history of our Christianity, because we are riddled with violence and hatred. So what is the question then, if we look at this, the parable that Jesus brought with his entry into Jerusalem, saying, I am the bringer of peace. How does it challenge us today? Many ways. We are in many ways in the same circumstances than those people. We want something else than what is going on in this world. We probably want somebody raising up, standing up and say, for heaven's sake, let's just stop all these wars and come to a commitment of peace. We want somebody that will stand up as a leader and say, let's stop the corruption and let's stop the exploitation of those people who cannot fend for themselves, and let's build a just society. And it's in our hands to do that. But we don't, because we do not answer to this entry of Jesus into Jerusalem. So plainly said, if we are the followers of this Christ, if we are truly the congregation of the Christ, the body of Christ as Paul describes it, do we go out of our way to be radically welcoming to everybody in our midst? Do we go out of our way to be radically peacemakers, not only out there, but only in here, where we are? Do we really go out of our way to love unconditionally? Or are we still on our high white horse, riding the ego wherever we go, not willing to get off and to get onto a mediocre colt or donkey? And that's a question you can only answer yourself. Where do you find yourself within the parable of Jesus Christ coming into the city of Jerusalem and saying, as you're singing hosannas, but I bring a total different peace, and I bring a total different love than the one that you expect and the one that you actually want. And that's a challenge for us as a congregation in the world we live in. Do we fight injustice? Or do we try to put a band-aid over it by just looking at the victims of that injustice? Or are we willing to stand up for a change and say, this needs to stop? Because if we do that, we will become very unpopular in this world. And I don't think we really want that, do we? We want to be very popular so that more and more people will join us. But it's not a popularity contest. It is how true are we to this message of this man on the back of a donkey riding into a city, not a big festivities like on the other side of the city with the governor entering, mediocre entry into Jerusalem, but a life-changing one. How far would you allow this man on the back of a donkey to change your life? That's up to you. And the man on the donkey awaits your response. Amen.